Welcome to this explainer. Deciding exactly where a government spends its money is, well, it's a colossal task. And honestly, it's a task that impacts literally every aspect of your daily life. From the roads you drive on, to the schools in your neighborhood, all the way down to the exact chunk of taxes missing from your paycheck. So today, we're diving deep into the fascinating machinery of government budgeting. We're going to go from grassroots, targeted spending, all the way up to the heavy macroeconomic reality of national debt. All right, let's jump right in and decode how public money actually works. To do that, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with targeted budgeting strategies, then look at the anatomy of the budget, explore where the money lives, move on to understanding budget deficits, and finish up with the deficit financing dilemma.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Targeted Budgeting Strategies.
Okay, before we zoom out to the giant macroeconomic numbers, it's absolutely crucial to understand how a government uses the budget as a tool to drive actual social change. Take gender equality, for example. In India, women make up about 48% of the population, but historically, they've trailed behind on critical indicators like health, education, and economic opportunities. So how do you fix that financially? Well, back in 2005, India introduced a dedicated gender budget. And get this. Over 16 years, that commitment saw a massive six-fold increase, hitting over 1,43,000 crore rupees by 2020. That is a deliberate, targeted strategy to ensure public money directly tackles social imbalances. What's really interesting here is how they actually split this gender budget up to maximize its impact. It's basically a two-part strategy. Part A is 100% for women. Think targeted safety nets like widow pensions or vital maternity benefits. But then take a look at Part B, which makes up a whopping 84% of the total gender budget. These are broader, general public programs, like school midday meals, that strictly mandate at least 30% of their funds go straight to women. It's a brilliant way to ensure women aren't just isolated in niche programs, but are woven right into the core fabric of national development.
Beyond just gender, how do governments make sure they aren't wasting money? Enter performance budgeting. Rather than just blindly throwing cash at a recurring problem year after year, governments actually look at past fiscal data. They measure a scheme's real-world success and use that to figure out how to allocate resources in the future. It's all about prioritizing public expenditure based on actual, measurable performance targets, not just good intentions.
And hey, budgeting doesn't have to be this top-down thing decided by politicians behind closed doors. Participatory budgeting completely flips the script. It's a democratic approach where community members themselves directly decide how part of a public budget gets spent in their own neighborhoods. In India, the Jana Graha movement pioneered this in Bengaluru back in 2001, and it took incredibly firm roots over in Pune. Putting financial power right in the hands of the citizens? That's huge for increasing civic engagement and rebuilding trust in local institutions. Bringing all of this grassroots transparency into the modern era, we have e-budgeting. This is essentially the digitization of the entire budgetary process. By utilizing open data and putting massive data sets on the internet, civil society and everyday people get a clear digital window into public decision-making. It transforms the budget from a dusty, incomprehensible paper document into an accessible platform where you can literally track where your tax rupees are going. Moving right along to Section 2, Anatomy of the Budget. Now that we've seen the strategic goals, let's pull back the curtain and look at the literal blueprint of a national budget. Picture this structural tree diagram as the ultimate mental map of the government's finances. It's split cleanly down the middle. On one side, we've got budget receipts, which is all the money coming in. On the other side, budget expenditure, all the money going out. And beneath each of those main branches, things are split again into revenue and capital components. The crucial takeaway here is understanding the difference between revenue and capital. The revenue budget deals entirely with day-to-day operations. It's your regular tax receipts coming in and routine maintenance going out, like paying government salaries or keeping the lights on in public schools. The capital budget, however, is all about the long game. This handles the creation of major physical assets, like building a brand new national highway or managing major long-term national loans. Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, where the money lives. If that structural tree is the blueprint, where are the actual physical bank accounts holding these trillions of rupees? Well, the granddaddy of them all is the Consolidated Fund of India. Practically all the government's revenues and loan money go straight into this central vault. And it operates under a remarkably strict democratic rule. Absolutely no money leaves this fund without explicit, formal approval from Parliament. It guarantees legislative oversight over the nation's core wealth. Now, in sharp contrast to that central vault is the public account.
This account holds things like small civic savings and your personal provident funds. The vital thing to grasp here is that this money does not actually belong to the government. They are merely acting as a banker, holding these funds in trust until they need to be paid back. So even though it's a massive pool of cash, it is strictly off-limits for funding government policies.
But wait, what happens during a sudden crisis, like a natural disaster? That is exactly where the Contingency Fund of India comes in. This is a dedicated emergency pot of money held on behalf of the president. Because let's face it, urgent emergencies cannot wait for a lengthy parliamentary debate. The money can be accessed immediately to save lives, and then they just get formal parliamentary approval after the fact. All right, let's dive into Section 4, Understanding Budget Deficits.
All these accounts are great, but what happens when the government simply needs to spend more money than it actually brings in? The very first warning sign on the economic dashboard is a revenue deficit. This happens when the government isn't even generating enough from regular taxes to cover its basic recurrent daily expenses. Think about your own personal finances. It's basically like taking out a high-interest credit card loan just to pay your monthly grocery and electricity bills. The government is forced to borrow money just to keep the lights on. To see the real big picture, we have to look at the fiscal deficit. That's the total amount of government borrowing across the board for the year. But here is the catch. A huge chunk of that borrowing might just be paying off the interest on old loans taken out decades ago. It doesn't actually reflect what the government is choosing to spend right now. So, economists calculate the primary deficit. First, we take that total fiscal deficit. Then, we subtract those old interest payments. What we are left with isolates just this current year's financial imbalance. By stripping away the financial baggage of the past, the primary deficit shows us the true health of the government's active decisions today.
And finally, Section 5, the Deficit Financing Dilemma.
When there's a deficit gap, the government has to fill it. They do this by borrowing from the public, taking foreign loans, or even getting the central bank to print more money, which is called deficit financing. But this creates a profound dilemma because it's a massive double-edged sword. On the plus side, it doesn't immediately hike your taxes. And brilliantly, it sparks what's called the multiplier effect. $1 spent by the government creates a ripple of spending throughout society, leading to much larger overall economic growth. It gets the wheels turning. But look at the disadvantages. Injecting all that borrowed money can trigger vicious cycles of inflation. It eats away at everyday purchasing power and can actually worsen income inequality for folks on fixed incomes. This exact trade-off leads to one of the greatest heavyweight debates in the history of economics. In one corner, we have John Maynard Keynes, who argued that governments absolutely must run deficits and increase spending to drive employment and revive a stagnant economy. In the opposite corner, classical thinkers like Adam Smith and David Ricardo, these strongly disapproved of public debt, viewing it as inherently wasteful and arguing that it just acts as an unproductive burden that drains a nation's wealth over time. Which leaves us with a truly provocative theory known as Ricardian equivalence. This theory argues that everyday consumers are actually incredibly smart and forward-looking. We know that a government deficit financed by borrowing today is, mathematically speaking, just a guaranteed tax hike tomorrow. Because of this, the theory suggests we simply save our money today to prepare to pay for tomorrow's higher taxes. This means the government's extra spending doesn't actually boost the economy at all. It just gets completely neutralized by citizens locking away their wallets in anticipation. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I leave you with this question to ponder. When a government borrows billions to fund its budget, is it truly stimulating the economy? Or is it just sending the bill to our future selves?